We've all had that feeling when you're lying awake in bed, watching the seconds go by, then the minutes go by, which turns into hours, and then you're just realizing how little sleep you're gonna get. We all know we need sleep, and this is why we get stressed out when we realize we're gonna have a bad night of sleep, because we're gonna be really cranky the next day. Now, there could be a lot of reasons why you are struggling sleeping for one specific night. For example, the day before my DAT or my dental admission test, I didn't sleep at all. The DAT is this big test that you have to take when you're applying for dental school, and it's really important because if you don't do good, then you probably won't get in. That night I went to bed at a normal time and I was planning on getting a good 8 hours of sleep, but I literally slept 0 hours. In this case, it's probably because I had a ton of anxiety. Or you could be jet lagged. For example, my family would go to India pretty much every year when I was a kid growing up. And India, compared to where I live in Michigan, has a 9.5 hour time difference. So at nighttime in India, when we would first go, I wouldn't be tired and I couldn't sleep. But in this video, I wanna help you on those average nights where it's not something crazy or major like that, but you still can't sleep. Whether it's as soon as you get in bed to go to sleep, or if you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night or something and then you come back and then you're just lying awake, tossing and turning. So there is a general rule that I like to follow from Dr. Matthew Walker, who wrote a book called Why We Sleep, and he's an expert sleep researcher. He recommends to not lie awake in bed for more than 20 minutes at a time. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly 20 minutes. It's kind of like a rough estimate, but I don't want you to stare at your phone and be like, oh, it's been 19.5 minutes. I got 30 seconds to fall asleep before I get up. But if you've been lying in bed for a while trying to fall asleep, then you're probably gonna make yourself more and more anxious that you can't fall asleep in the first place. You wanna associate your bed with being tired and being sleepy. You don't want to associate it with being anxious. So next time you're lying awake in bed trying to fall asleep and you're just struggling, instead you should get up, walk around for a bit, and go to a different room until you feel tired. This over time will kind of trick your brain, where you don't associate your bed with the anxiety of trying to go to sleep. Instead, you associate it with being tired. This is my place to be tired and go to sleep. Because instead, if you stay lying awake in bed, the anxiety of not being able to sleep is gonna keep you awake even longer. And I also wanna mention, just not being able to sleep properly for one night, it doesn't mean that you have insomnia. It's perfectly normal to have a night every now and then where you're not sleeping properly. And some days it's better just to accept it, like, okay, this isn't my night to get a perfect 8 hours of sleep. There are some other general tips I wanna give to just improve your sleep and help prevent you from waking up and lying awake in bed too. The first is making sure you keep your bedroom both cool and dark. An ideal temperature for sleeping is 65 degrees Fahrenheit, and you want it to be as dark as possible. Even if you're going to the bathroom in the middle of the night, it's better to not use any light, or at least use the dimmest lights you possibly can. Because any exposure to light, you'll be surprised how much it can suppress your melatonin. And your melatonin is a very powerful hormone that will regulate your sleep. And it gets suppressed by light. And also there's studies on keeping people cool while they're sleeping. And when people are colder, they tend to sleep longer and more efficiently. You also want to avoid eating too much and drinking too much right before bed. I like to have my dinner at least 3 hours before I go to sleep, and I try to avoid drinking water right before I go to sleep. This will just prevent you from waking up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and we all know how hard it is sometimes to go back to sleep after you go to the bathroom. You also want to avoid too much caffeine. Now, I'm going to talk about caffeine specifically in a little bit, so I'm gonna hold off on talking about that more right now. But the last thing is to just stick to a sleep schedule. If you're normally going to bed at like 2 in the morning and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what, I'm gonna sleep at 10 p.m. tonight. You're probably gonna have a hard time falling asleep because your circadian rhythm is used to going to bed so much later. And you also wanna avoid taking a nap too late in the afternoon. I would avoid naps after 3 p.m. if possible. And the reason comes down to this molecule called adenosine. Your adenosine is this molecule that builds up throughout the day the longer you've been awake. And the more adenosine you have, the more sleepy you will feel. So if you have a ton of adenosine, you're gonna feel really tired and wanna go to sleep. But anytime you sleep, you're taking away some of this adenosine. So if you nap too late in the afternoon or for too long, then you're gonna have a harder time falling asleep at night and staying asleep. Now, if this starts becoming a recurring issue every single day for like months, then it could be insomnia. But insomnia actually has a very strict criteria. For you to have insomnia, you need to have an ongoing amount of the sleep difficulty for weeks and weeks. Actually, there are some very specific things that have to be checked off before you get diagnosed with insomnia. And these also include the obvious, which is not being happy with your sleep quantity or quality, having a hard time falling asleep, staying asleep, sleep, etc. But also you have to suffer distress or daytime impairment, and you need to have this insomnia at least 3 nights each week for more than 3 months. And lastly, you have to not have any other coexisting mental disorders or conditions that could cause these other symptoms. Now, surprisingly, with this very strict criteria, insomnia is still pretty common. 1 in 9 people still have insomnia. But if you still struggle sleeping, but it doesn't fit this insomnia criteria, it still could be something else. For example, drinking too much caffeine. I told you I was going to talk about caffeine in a bit. Caffeine is also a molecule that will target adenosine. Instead of clearing away the adenosine in your brain though, your caffeine will bind to your adenosine receptors and block your actual adenosine from reaching its adenosine receptor. What that means is, even if more and more adenosine is building up in your brain, you won't feel that tired. So instead of really waking you up, caffeine more so prevents you from feeling tired. But the problem with caffeine is it lasts for a long time. So your caffeine will peak at about 30 minutes after you ingest it. But it can have a half-life up to 6 hours. So that means when you drink a cup of coffee, 6 hours later, half of that coffee is still in your system. So if you drink a cup of coffee at 6 p.m., that means at midnight, that's equivalent to drinking half a cup of coffee. And half a cup of coffee is still pretty powerful. You might think that, oh, I can sleep just fine after some coffee, so that probably doesn't affect me. But studies show that even if you can sleep after drinking coffee, your sleep will not be as good quality. You won't get as deep sleep and that restorative sleep that you desperately need. That means that you're still gonna be tired the next day and probably rely on that coffee even more. And it's not just coffee that has caffeine. There's a lot of other things that you probably don't even realize, like chocolate or some ice creams, some teas, or your Coca-Cola. And if you don't drink any caffeine and you know for sure you don't have insomnia, but you still have some of these issues, then it could also be another sleep disorder. You could also have sleep disordered breathing. New studies are showing that 90% of people that say that their sleep aids aren't working actually have a sleep disordered breathing problem. What that means is that your airway has some sort of obstruction. Whether your airway is collapsing, like for example, if your tongue is falling in the back and cutting off your breathing, this is a common cause of sleep apnea, where you're literally choking in the middle of the night and you keep waking up gasping for air. There are multiple studies showing that when you improve someone's airway or their breathing when they're sleeping, that their symptoms of insomnia actually go away. So how do you improve your airway? Well, there could be a ton of things. It could be you needing a CPAP machine or a surgery or your tonsils removed, or it could be something really simple like you just needing a nasal dilator or just using a mouth tape. Yes, where you literally take a piece of tape and tape your mouth shut while you're sleeping. What I would suggest would be to get a sleep study. And this is kind of a baseline where you can see how your sleep is in the first place. And I'd also suggest going to an ENT or an ear, nose, and throat doctor who can further evaluate your airway. But the simplest way to start to improve your breathing when you're sleeping is to try to only breathe through your nose all night long. If you know for sure that you're not gonna be able to breathe through your nose, and if you tape your mouth shut, that you're not gonna be able to breathe at all, well, that is a separate issue, and I talked about that more in a different video on how you can actually unblock your nose. So I'm putting that in the description below, so make sure you check that out. But breathing through your nose is just so much better than breathing through your mouth, and it can also prevent a lot of airway issues, like your airway collapsing, and even prevent sleep apnea. Because a lot of times what happens when you're breathing through your mouth, if you're lying on your back, your tongue can fall back and cut off your breathing, and this can cause you to snore or even completely cut off your breathing and cause sleep apnea. Now, I personally tape my mouth shut when I'm sleeping, and the tape that I use is something called 3M micropore paper tape. It's literally this medical grade tape that you can rip off a piece and tape over your lips. If you're really worried about not being able to breathe through your mouth, you can also put this tape vertically over your lips, like one vertical strip over your lips. That way you can still breathe through your mouth if you have to, but it's still resisting your lips from opening. I personally do it horizontally, but that's because I have a mustache and a beard and I don't want to rip that off. But you might have to use some additional things like a nasal decongestant spray before you go to sleep so that you can probably breathe through your nose. But like I said, I'm putting that other video in the description below where you can properly unblock your nose or properly start breathing through your nose again. So thank you guys for watching. I hope that helped. So next time you're lying awake in bed, try some of these tips and see if that helps. We always hear about sleep conditions like sleep apnea and insomnia, and it's really important to address these. But we don't really hear about the effects it can do to your teeth and your jaw. But you might be surprised how many effects will happen to your mouth area simply because of a sleep disorder. So today I'm gonna go over 10 dental problems you can get from a